Hello world! Descent of Dragons is almost upon us, and we have a lot of new cards. We actually have the most amount of new cards ever released for an expansion, and because this is the last expansion in rotation before next April, there are a lot of possible decks. So if you, among a lot of others out there, are wondering where to even start or what decks that are going to be good to craft on day one, well, I got you covered. I have prepared for you guys 2 decks from each class, so 18 total decks that are going to be not only viable, but fun to play on day 1 for Descent of Dragons. I also have 2 bonus meme decks for you guys towards the end, so make sure you stick through to the end of this video so that way you guys can check those out as well. Now, there are some obvious decks like Pirate Warrior that I didn't really cover here because that's kind of an obvious deck. So I wanted to show you some not so obvious decks that are also going to be just as good and fun to play with. All the decks that I'll be going over in this video are going to be listed down below in the description along with the timestamp. So if you have a favorite class or if one of the decks interests you, you can go ahead and skip along to that section of the video. Now, all of these decks are homebrew off-meta creations created by yours truly. So if you found this video helpful, if you like these deck lists, then please leave a like down below and consider subscribing as it does help me out a ton. Without further ado, let's get into the deck lists. This first Hunter deck is going to be a good old classic Face Hunter deck. So some of the new cards revealed were Dwarven Sharpshooter, Toxic Reinforcements, Phase Stalker, and Dragonbane. So all these cards naturally want you to be pressing your hero power over and over again, and your hero power smorks, so I'm like, let's build the rest of the deck pretty smorky as well. So we have a little bit of a secret package in here with Explosive Trap, Pressure Plate, and Rat Trap to kind of protect our face a little bit while we go ahead and smork. Because one thing that, as you press your hero power in Hunter, that doesn't affect the board at all. So your opponent can develop the board while you're pushing your face damage, but you have to be careful to not let your opponent develop too big of a board, otherwise they'll kill you before you can kill them. So while our secrets help protect our face a little bit, Dwarven Sharpshooter can also help protect our face a little bit when we don't want to actually smork our opponent too hard. But we do have a ton of damage in this deck, so we should be able to overrun our opponent and kill them very, very quickly. So one thing you can do is you can play Phase Stalker on turn 2. If it sticks around, what you can do is you can play like a Spring Paw, hero power, you get a secret, so not only do you develop a little bit of a board, you get to push some face damage, and that also does curve into Hyena Alpha. And then of course we have our finishers with Leroy Jenkins and maybe even like some life drinkers to keep us alive for a little while longer. But a couple cards I was really excited to use in this deck were Waterboy and Black-Walled Pixie. These are 2 cards that we've had for a while, but we haven't really had a really good chance to use them. So Waterboy, I think, is kind of cool because naturally you want to be using your hero power a lot, so you don't mind using its effect, and you also get to develop just a little bit of a body at the same time. And then Black-Walled Pixie is kind of a finisher to maybe enable your Toxic Reinforcements. So on turn 7, you get to push your hero power, play the Pixie, and then hero power again, which that is basically 2 triggers on your Toxic Reinforcements into 1 turn. Yeah, this will be a super fun and fast deck too if you like those really smorky kind of decks to be able to finish off your opponent by turns, 6 or 7. This will be the deck to do that. The next Hunter deck for you guys is going to be a Dragon Highlander deck. So I know a lot of you guys are excited to use the new card Varanus, and also with any Highlander deck, we can always throw in Dragon Queen Alexstrasza as well. So this is, I think, will be the best deck to utilize both of those. Now, this is going to be somewhat similar to the old deck in the way that we use the secret package with a 1 of each secret plus subject 9. I think that's just a really solid tool in any kind of Highlander Hunter deck. It thins your deck. You kind of stall in the early game for a little bit. But a couple of the new cards that we get to use as well, which have some really good synergy. Diving Griffin is fantastic to go ahead and draw some of those key rush minions, like the new Faceless Corruptor. You get to draw Evasive Worm or your Ziliax. And then we also have Scale Rider and Primordial Explorer for the early game as well. Now, one card that I think is going to be absolutely busted, not only in this deck, but just in this expansion overall, is going to be Faceless Corruptor. So it's basically like a neutral Oasis Surger. If any of you guys have played Druid, or against Druid, you know how powerful that can be. There's a lot of targets that you can go ahead and eat with your Faceless Corruptor as well. So you have like those cheap Shimmerflies or Spring Paws. You maybe have some snakes from a snake trap. Even just trading off one of your earlier minions. Like let's say you trade off your Primordial Explorer, maybe one of the hyenas from your Hyena Alpha, or maybe like a Scale Rider, just trade it into a minion so when it's a low health, you can eat it with your Faceless Corruptor, and all of a sudden you get a full health 5/4 with Rush. This is probably going to be one of the more powerful Hunter decks that we see this expansion. No, definitely this list and none of the deck lists that I'm going to be showing today are fully 100% refined because these are only theory crafts. But I think this will probably be the best bet for one of the top tier Hunter decks that we'll see. Getting into Druid, they finally did it, guys. They finally printed enough support cards that we can make a Treant Druid deck. So some of the new cards that have enabled this archetype now, we have Tree Enforcements, Shrubadier, Aeroponics, and Goru the Might Tree. So we have a lot of synergy cards that actually enable this now. And I think the best way to go with this is some kind of like a token type deck that we finish with a Savage Roar combo. The early game is just going to consist of just filling up the board here like a natural token druid does with Acorn Bearer, Dreamway Guardians, Shrubadier, Landscaping, etc. Then you want to kind of buff them up just to kind of establish some early board control. Through the mid game, if your Treants stick around, you can go ahead and transform them all into 5/5 Ancients with your Tree Speaker. Now, a lot of you might think, but this has anti-synergy with your Treants because it transforms them into Ancients. They don't actually die with the Mulch, or for the Mulch Muncher to be active. I mean, that's correct, but now I believe that we have enough Treants that Mulch Muncher will always be cheap. You don't always have to have every single one of your Treants die. And also, too, if you just transform a full board on turn 5 into 5/5 Ancients, that's kind of like a Chef Nomi on turn 5. So you're probably just going to win the game right then and there, and you don't even need your Mulch Muncher to win the game. Now, if the game does go longer, we do have the Goru Might Tree, plus the Forest Aid, and then maybe we throw down a few Mulch Munchers through the mid and end game as well, too. But our Treants are going to be pretty large through the end game that if we just don't polish them off with a big Savage Roar, I think just overwhelming them with big Treants, like 3/3 Treants, will do the job. I know I've been looking forward to a Treant deck for a while. I know a lot of you guys have as well too. So here it is. This will be the list that we finally get to play with for that archetype. The second deck that I prepared for you guys is going to be a Dragon deck, but not just any Dragon Druid, a Highlander Dragon Druid. I am just obsessed with the new card, Alexstrasza. And as I was building this deck too, I found that there was quite a lot of expensive dragons, between 7 to 9 mana cost. So I figured a Juicy Psych Melon was the perfect fit in this deck as well too. And there's enough dragons now that we can actually have one of each and be comfortable not losing out on anything. The really nice thing about playing Druid and Dragons is Druid does have a couple ways to ramp up to those really big expensive dragons. We have Biology Project and we have Wild Growth, but we also have the new card Breath of Dreams. And then through the mid game, we can ramp even further with the Nourish. And because we have so many dragons in this deck, I figured what better card to use than the new Frizz Kindle Roost to go ahead and make them even less expensive. So not only are we ramping, but we're also making the dragons cheaper. So we should be able to get to play those big expensive dragons very quickly. And just to make them even bigger, we have one copy of an Embiggen in here. But just until we can go ahead and ramp up to our big dragons, the early game is just going to be kind of controlling a little bit more. You know, we have the Wrath, the Bees, the Swipe. We have a Doomsayer, like a Fire Tree Witch Doctor, so we can put something down on the board. But it should be pretty quick and easy to get up to your big swing turns with your big dragons. And if your big, thick dragons don't polish off your opponent, then when you play Ysera Unleashed, which you do have a couple chances to draw, either by herself or with your Juicy Psych Melon, then just getting all of those Dream Portals, just refilling your entire board with a bunch more thick dragons, that will do it. Now, I'm unsure as far as like consistency if a Highlander deck or if a regular version deck of this Dragon Druid will be better, but I figured this is more fun and we get to use the new Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, so hence why I made this one. The first mage deck I have for you guys is going to be like a Cyclone spell aggro mage. Some of the new cards that inspired me with this one is going to be Elemental Allies, drawing 3 spells from your deck, so drawing 3 really cheap spells, synergizes not only with Mana Cyclone, as of old, but the new tAwA. Also, too, the new card Violet Spellwing inspired me too, because it does give you a cheap Arcane Missiles while putting a body on the board. Now, cheap spells aren't going to win the game by themselves, so we have to have a win condition. So the win conditions for this deck is going to be tAwA, just filling up your entire board with these 5/5 elementals. If you can land a tAwA and or Sorcerer's Apprentice on the board at the same time, I mean, you can just get so many 5/5 elementals, like 1, 2, 3, 4 of them in a single turn. We also have Vex Crows to be able to refill our board as well too with all these cheap spells. We have a couple copies of Questing Adventurer to get him pretty big very cheaply. And then for the end game, we have Archmage Antonidas to finish off our opponent with a bunch of fireballs, and we also have a new card, Mana Giant. Because a lot of the cards that we play in this deck are going to be generating, like let's say a Rare Frost or Magic Trick, and then we get a ton of random spells back with Mana Cyclone. We also get a couple of bananas with our Banana Buffoon. So the Mana Giant shouldn't be too hard to discount down to a playable mana cost like 3 or below. Now we only have 1 copy of him in here because I figure this is more of like a mid and end game type minion after we already do our Cyclone shenanigans and after we're starting to generate some stuff. You can't really ever play him too early until you start doing some of your tricks. But if you guys like slinging some spells and playing a couple elementals, this is the deck for you. The next mage deck is going to be a Dragon Highlander Mage. This one is going to use the shell of old, but we're going to throw in a lot more dragons into this deck. So we have some of the newer dragons like Malygos, Aspect of Magic, and we have Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, which naturally fits in any Highlander deck. Some of the other newer cards that we throw into here, we have Arcane Breath for that early control. We also have Azure Explorer, so that way we can maybe potentially discover another Kalecgos or another Dragon Queen Alexstrasza or something cool like that. But the nice thing about Azure Explorer is that if it sticks onto the board, it does curve into a Rolling Fireball, which is another new card as well too to help deal with some of those aggro decks. Now, one of the more powerful cards in this deck is actually going to be a rare. It's going to be Dragon Caster. So if you hold a dragon, the next spell that you cast this turn costs 0. That's going to be absolutely huge to be able to cast like a free Luna's Pocket Galaxy, maybe clear the board with like a Blizzard or Flame Strike, or maybe even just develop too with like a Power of Creation. So it's just so versatile to be able to throw another 4/4 body on the board as well as doing other things. This is such a versatile deck. It controls, it develops. So this will be one of the decks to watch out for. This next deck, I know a lot of you guys are looking forward to. It is a Dragon Paladin deck. So we have a lot of new cards that we can throw into this deck. There's the Bronze Explorer. There's, Amber Watcher, which is insane because a lot of the times Paladin decks just got overrun by aggro decks, but now they have a little bit more survivability with Amber Watcher. We have a lot more value cards too, like the Dragon Breeder, Dragon Rider Talritha, is absolutely insane. And then of course those really big dragons in the late game like Evasive Draconid, Twin Tyrant, etc. Now, not only can we discount like half of our deck here with Frizz Kindle Roost, but we actually have a way of ramping in a Paladin with Nozdormu the Timeless. Now, some of you may think, but Funky, doesn't your opponent get to use the 10 mana crystals first? So doesn't it benefit your opponent? To which I say, kind of. Your opponent still has to deal with an 8/8 on the board. Even if they do have 10 mana, a lot of the times they're going to spend 3 to 5 mana trying to deal with an 8/8 on your side of the board, which means they'll only have like 5 to 7 mana left over on their turn, and then you actually get to make use of the full 10 mana crystals to develop then. So not only do we have Frizz to discount our deck, but we also have 2 copies of Dragon Speaker to buff up our dragons as well. So we can cast some really cheap, big dragons. If we are struggling against aggro, we can always heal up with Crystal Smith Kangor, Lightforged Blessing, and then our Amber Watchers. So as long as we make it through the mid to the end game, just the pure amount of stats that we have on our dragons should just win most games. Now, another cool thing that we can do with our Dragon Speaker and buffing up our cards is to buff up the non-targetable ones. So we can buff up the Evasive Draconids, the Evasive Worms, and our Evasive Feywing. Not only is untargetable stuff just really annoying to deal with, but try having to deal with a huge 9/9 untargetable, or even stronger. A ton of stats, a ton of value. This deck is definitely going to be a tough one to beat. This deck is going to be on the faster side of things. It's going to be a Mech Aggro Paladin. So this deck was brought about because of some of the new cards, Skyclaw and Righteous Cause and Hot Air Balloon. So naturally, all these cards are very token-based, very aggressive-based, and the whole mech package in general was pretty aggressive already. So this just makes it even faster. Now, this deck, because we lost Divine Favor quite a ways back, we don't have any refill in this deck besides our Crystologies. So we're just going to be relying on just sheer aggro, sheer aggression, and just killing our opponent before they can stabilize. I mean, the Paladin class already had enough mechs to begin with Micro Mummies and Glowtrons and whatnot. So the whole mech package naturally fits well in the Paladin class. So in addition to putting out just a lot of these really sticky mechs, one nice thing about mechs is that a lot of them have death rattles or reborn, like Micro Mummy, Snip Snap, Replicating Menace. So in most cases, you should still have a mech on the board that you can always magnetize onto. And the thing about magnetizing a mech onto an existing mech is it kind of treats it like charge. So that's why mechs naturally fit well into aggressive decks. And then we always have the True Silver Champion, the Blessed of Kings, and the Leroy to polish off our opponent. If there's tons of removal in the meta, this one might struggle a bit, but it might just be fast enough, especially in the first earlier weeks of the expansion, to be able to get those quick games in and smoke down all your opponents. Now, this first priest deck that I got for you guys is a super spicy one. It is a Highlander Galakrond control deck. So Galakrond naturally fits into control decks because he destroys random enemy minions. And also too, he just generates so much value throughout the game as you're invoking, and then after you play him to get more minions every single turn with your hero power. So with this deck, you don't need a whole lot of card draw because you're going to be generating everything that you need anyways. And we have some huge bombs in this deck. So Chrono Breaker is another removal tool with Priest. We have, and it also does count as a dragon. Time Rip is another removal tool. Galakrond is. Murazan the Infinite is another great value card. And then, of course, we have the Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, which is just a huge late game bomb as well. So overall, like, there's just so many threats in this deck while still playing control. It does make it difficult for the opponent, kind of like the old control warriors, with Dr. Boom. You get to remove a tool and develop the board at the same time with their mechs, similarly to this deck as well. You get to constantly play control with really your removal, but you're still dropping some really big threats on the board at the same time. One of my favorite cards in this deck is Princess Talanji. So naturally, you're generating a lot of minions with your Galakrond hero power. So just to make sure that your hand doesn't get too full, or if you just want like a late game, like almost finisher in a way, you just drop Princess Talanji and it fills up your whole board with every single minion that you've generated so far. But I think this deck has a ton of potential. Whether we see a Highlander version or not, like this one, I think that some kind of a Galakrond controlled Dragon Priest will definitely be at the top of the meta. Now, if you thought that last deck was spicy, this one is going to be even spicier. This is going to be a Xeric Master Cloner Priest. So this deck revolves around using a Dead Ringer to draw your Xeric Master Cloner, and then just go ahead and just dumping all your spells onto him, so that way basically he goes infinite and you fill up your entire board with a bunch of these 5/5 minions. So you can do that with Shadowy Figures, Embalming Rituals, etc. We also have the new card Grave Rune. So if you target Grave Rune onto Xeric Master Cloner, not only do you get the original back, but you get 2 more of him back, which then you can keep cloning with. And I figured too, with all the spells that we're casting, Grave Horror is really good for that too. Another really cool thing that you can do with this deck is if you use Archmage Vargoth, we do have a copy of Power Word Replicate and 2 copies of Vivid Nightmare. So if he sticks on the board, let's say on turn 4, next turn you can Power Word Replicate onto your Vargoth, and then both those Vargoths will then cast another powered replicate at the end of your turn. So you'll end up with 4 Vargoths, 3 of them being 5/5s. So there's quite a few different threats in this deck. You have the Xeric Master Cloner, you have the Vargoth combo potentials. You also have the Grave Horror. So if you discount Grave Horror cheap enough, what you can do is you can cast him and then cast a Grave Rune on your Grave Horror, and then you can cast your Shadowy Figure onto that. So then you can end up with a board full of Grave Horrors if you want to, which is really good to go ahead and stop aggro decks. Now, this deck probably isn't going to be as good as the Highlander Dragon Control Priest that we just saw, but this is definitely going to be fun. It still might win you some games if you just want to go ahead and, I don't know, just kind of mess around with some cool combos. Getting into Rogue now. The first one I want to showcase for you guys is going to be a Galakrond Waxadred Rogue. So Waxadred was one of the first cards revealed for this expansion, and as soon as it was revealed, everybody just started talking about the combo potential of this, filling up your entire board with Waxadreds permanently. So we have a few ways of doing that. One thing that we can do, we can Shadow of Death our Waxadreds. We can use stowAway to either draw the Waxadreds or to draw the candles that Waxadred will shuffle into our deck. And then we also have Necreum Apothecary to copy not only the Waxadred, but also draw him as well. So there's lots of ways that we can end up with a complete board full of Waxadreds. Now, they don't have taunt or rush or anything, so you're pretty much relying on some of that late game value just to go ahead and just keep trading with him, or maybe have your opponent keep moving your board over and over and over again until you can go ahead and just chip your opponent down with all these Waxadreds. This deck might be weak against aggro decks because it takes a little while for this combo to get going, for you to actually start to get those Waxadreds on the board, so they might just overrun you by then. But we do have kind of an earlier game Lackey package, as well as the Galakrond. So Galakrond, as you're invoking, as you're using things like Praise Galakrond, Devoted Maniac, etc., you're getting lackeys back into your hand with Galakrond's hero power. So you can use these early lackeys to kind of fight for board, make sure that you kind of get ahead on board until you get your Waxadred combo going. And then a couple cool things you can do with all these lackeys. One thing you can do is use Heist Baron Togwaggle to draw 3 cards from your deck for free. So not only do you get to draw free cards with the treasure if you so choose to kind of control the board, but you might draw into some of those candles or might draw into some of those Waxadreds. You can also use Faceless Corruptor. This is one of my favorite newest cards here. You're playing a lot of lackeys naturally, so you can transform one of your lackeys into another 5/4 rusher along with this guy. So for 5 mana, you can get 2 5/4 rushers, and that'll really help fight for board. And then, of course, when we upgrade the Galakrond, we can draw 4 cards for free, which we're probably going to draw into a candle or a Waxadred or something like that. But this deck is pretty much dependent on how much aggro we'll see. The first few days or week or two of the expansion, we usually see a lot of aggro decks. So this one, it might struggle. We'll just have to kind of see how it plays out versus these aggro decks. But if you can get a couple of these Waxadreds going into the mid and late game, you're going to be set. This next rogue deck is going to be a hyper aggressive pirate rogue deck. So we got a lot of new pirates in Descent of Dragons that allow us to be super aggressive here. Bloodsail Flybooter and Parachute Brigand are 2 cards that allow you to be super aggressive. Bloodsail Flybooter just kind of floods your board with pirates, which is naturally good with Cannon Barrage because you'll have a lot of pirates, and it's also good with Bloodsail Howler. Also too, just these little 1/1s is very easy to activate combo type stuff. So Cold Blood, Eviscerate, Evil Miscreant, Hooked Scimitar, very easy to get those activated. And then just playing a free 2/2 on the board with Parachute Brigand just allows you to push even that much more face damage. And then we do have the late game finishers with Myra's Unstable Element and Leroy Jenkins just to go ahead and top off our damage if Cannon Barrage does not kill them. But yeah, pretty straightforward deck. Basically, you just want to smork your opponent down. I think this is going to be a super fast, super aggressive deck. That'll be very cheap to craft and also fun to play for the first couple weeks especially. The first Shaman deck I want to bring to you guys is going to be an Aggro Overload Shaman. Now, this is an archetype that's kind of existed for a while, but we have even more cards to make it even better and even more explosive. So we have Cumulo Maximus, which is Battlecry, deal 5 damage to your opponent's face if you're overloaded, because why would you ever use it on a minion? And then we also have Surging Tempest, the new 1-drop that is basically a 2/3 at all times if you're overloaded, which you will be. And then we have Storm's Wrath as well, because we are going to be making quite a bit of tokens here with Thunderhead and Voltaic Burst and whatnot, Sludge Slurpers. So this just kind of puts out just a little bit more damage. Think of it like a Grim Rally in Warlock. And the rest of this deck is pretty much going to be the Overload Shell. So we have the Spirit of the Frog to go ahead and just keep cycling through all of our damaging things. We can, zap an opponent's minion into Lightning Bolt our opponent's face, into putting on Earthen Might on one of our dudes, into Lava Bursting our opponent's face. We do have a Vicina in here, which is going to act like a pseudo Bloodlust for us. So if we have, 2, 3, 4 plus minions on the board, it's pretty much always going to be active, so that just pushes even more damage. And then, of course, we have the good old classic Doomhammer plus Rockbiter combo. So that's 10 damage that we can dish out with that. So between all of the face damage we're doing with Doomhammer, Cumulo Maximus, Lava Burst, that should just be so much burst damage that it'll be pretty tough for our opponent to out-heal that or to survive. The second deck for Shaman, I know a lot of you guys are looking forward to. It is going to be a Galakrond deck. So naturally, Galakrond and all of the Invoke cards have a lot of Battlecry synergy, so what better deck to put that into than a Quest deck? So a lot of this deck will look familiar, similar to the current Quest Shaman that we have currently, with the Sludge Slurpers, the Evil Totem, the Wasp, and everything. But we do have quite a few new cards as well. So we have all the Invoke cards and then the Galakrond package, obviously. So that's the Corrupt Elementalist. We have the Invocation of Frost, and then we have the Devoted Maniac. Now, the cool thing about the Shaman Galakrond is every time you invoke or use the hero power, you get a 2/1 with Rush. So all the tempo that you lose by playing an understated minion, you actually kind of gain back with your hero power, so you don't really lose out on that much tempo by playing your invoke cards. And also too, by invoking, we are actually going to go a little bit wider as well too, so we do make quite a few new minions, especially with Corrupt Elementalist. If we can use that with our hero power, we can basically fill up our entire board full of 2/1 rushers, and then on the next turn, that's why we have a copy of Bloodlust in here, so we can go ahead and use that on our wide boards. A couple of really cool things that you can do with this deck. Dragon's Pack is just an absolute powerhouse of a card. For 5 mana, you get 10-12 with Taunt worth of stats. It completely shuts down so many decks out there, especially aggro decks. And then Nidhogg as well too. If you combine that with your Quest hero power, you can get 4 eggs, which all turn into 4/4s if they live on the next turn. But even if these eggs die, at least it's damage that's not going to your face or towards other minions. So basically these eggs kind of have taunts. Your opponent has to deal with them. Otherwise they just get punished, or they have to throw a board removal at it, which if you're only using 1 card and your opponent has to board remove that, I'd say it's a win for you. And then also Shudderwock. So Shudderwock replays all battle cries, not just from your minions, which means it'll replay the battle cries from Galakrond the Tempest. So if you get this thing fully invoked, it'll summon 2, I believe 8/8s with Rush. So not only does he get to summon them, especially if you have the quest completed before that, you get 4 8/8s with Rush, but then Shudderwock will replay that as well too. Now, the tricky part about this deck is that the Galakrond and the quest hero powers kind of overlap. So whatever one you get completed first, it'll get overwritten by the second one. So a lot of the times you do want Galakrond to be played first, ideally, so that way you can overwrite his hero power with your quest hero power. But sometimes that's just not the case, and you just draw Galakrond through the mid game and the late game. But it's still not too terrible too, because you've probably already made use of your quest hero power first, and then you can double the battle cry of Galakrond, which means, then you get 4 8/8s with Rush. So this version right here will probably be the best way to utilize Galakrond, is in some kind of a battle cry or quest deck. But I think this deck is going to be absolute nutty. This will be the deck to watch out for. So if you guys want something just insanely strong, here you go. This is going to be a Warlock deck that I know a lot of you guys are excited about. It is going to be a Quest Dragon Handlock. A couple cards that we got that just scream obvious Handlock synergy. We have Dark Skies, Abyssal Summoner, and Valdris Felgorge. In addition to some really strong dragons that we can throw in this package as well too, like Crazed Netherwing, which is basically a Hellfire with a 5/5 body. And we also have some healing, which is Nether Breath. This allows Warlock to keep tapping, because previously before, if Warlock kept tapping to fill up their hand, they just didn't have the adequate healing to heal back that damage, but now they do. And then I figured, since we're running a lot of expensive dragons, to be able to activate Crazed Netherwing, Nether Breath. We have Zeraku and Crowd Roasters and Twin Tyrants in here. So we have a lot of expensive stuff. We might as well run the quest. We're going to be drawing quite a lot anyways to fill up our hand. So it's going to be pretty easy to fulfill the quest. And then we can also throw in the Unrancy Broodmothers just to get a little bit more healing for when we plot twist and whatnot. So not only do we have a pretty strong mid game with this deck, with the Twilight Drakes and the Mountain Giants, into Crazed Netherwings, into an Abyssal Summoner, but we also have a really, really strong late game as well too. For when we complete the quest, we can just start throwing down a bunch of removal stuff, as well as playing just like a couple of these strong dragons each turn. And then we have one of my favorite late game combo options. We have the Omega Agent and the Barista Lynchen, so that way we can just drop a full board full of these Omega Agents for a couple turns. But yeah, we have a lot of really strong threats. We're going to be drawing a lot too to keep our hand full of options. I think some form of Handlock will definitely make it into the meta. I really hope it's this one, because I always have fun with the quest. I hope you guys do as well. But yeah, this should be a lot of fun. Galakrond Zoo Warlock. That is the next deck that I will show you here. So with all of the Galakrond cards that Warlock has and their hero power, it seems to be very token based. Galakrond, every time you invoke it or use the hero power, summons 2/1/1 imps. And their invoke cards, the Dragonblight Cultist, gets +1 attack for each other friendly minion, and it creates 2 tokens. So very, very token based. And then same thing with Fiendish Rites as well too. You summon 2 minions and then you give them +1 attack. So very, very token based. So I figured, what better deck to use it in some version of like a zoo deck. So just looking around, I added just a ton of minions that synergize well with like token based shenanigans here. So you have things like Direwolf Alpha, drop that in between your 2 imps that you summon with Galakrond. You have the Knife Jugglers, throwing 2 daggers every time you invoke. And then you have the Scarab Egg and the Evil Genius as well too. The Scarab Egg is actually pretty easy to attack with, because you have the Fiendish Rites, meaning it gets some attack whenever you use Fiendish Rites. So there's lots of ways to break the egg as well. And then a couple cards that I really like in this deck here, Frostwolf Warlord and Faceless Lurker. So Frostwolf Warlord is, I believe, a classic card that never sees play, but you saw some play during the old days of like Odd Paladin, because you just were able to swarm your board so easily that this was always like a 5-mana 8/8 or above. Same thing with this deck. You're just swarming your field so much every single turn that this always has a chance of being huge. And then Faceless Corruptor is just so good in any kind of token-based deck, or anything that just has like a bunch of 1/1s, because you just easily eat a 1/1 to make it into a 5/4 rush. That's just insane tempo right there. And then, as with any kind of zoo deck, you do run out of cards in your hand very quickly, so that's where the Veiled Worshipper comes into play. So you just basically just get to refill your hand with the Veiled Worshipper, so you can just keep dumping stuff onto the board and just keep smorking. And of course, our finishers are going to be Leroy Jenkins and Galakrond the Wretched. So Galakrond just refills your board with hopefully some big minions. It is random, so it could give you a bunch of Witchwood Imps, or it could give you a bunch of Jumbo Imps. Now, there are probably some traditional zoo locks that are going to be better than a Galakrond zoo list, because these 1/1s, even though you are swarming your field quite often, typically die to any board clear that's out there, and there are going to be a lot of board clears. But with any kind of Galakrond list, this will probably be the go-to one. And it is very, very fast, so it might just go ahead and burst down some opponents before they can get to their board clears, or before they can stabilize. With this first warrior deck, we get to use Galakrond in a Galakrond Aggro deck. So the cool thing about Galakrond is when you play him, you get to draw 4 minions that all get buffed up by +4/+4, assuming he's fully upgraded. And this is great with any kind of charge minions. So if you happen to draw like Leroy or Gromosh or the Galakrond Elites, that's a lot of face damage that you get to put into your opponent next turn. And not only do you get the 5 attack from Galakrond's weapon this turn, but you also get the 5 damage next turn. So just by playing Galakrond over 2 turns, you're already putting out 10 damage, and then you can just use him basically as a finisher. So I was looking at some of the invoke cards, and by invoking Galakrond in Warrior, you get +3 attack for this turn. So naturally, that's a lot of face damage that you could be putting into your opponent. If you upgrade your Galakrond 2 or 3 times, or if you invoke him, that's already 6 to 9 damage that you've already pumped into your opponent's face. So Ritual Chopper is actually a really good weapon because on the turn that you play it, it's 4 attack, thanks to Galakrond's hero power, and then on the next turn it's 1. So for 2 mana, you get 5 damage total. And then with Awaken, not only do you get to damage your own minions that have wall damaged effects, but you also get to maybe clear your opponents, as well as gaining that 3 attack as well. And then of course you have the OP broken aggro combo of casting Inner Rage on something with Bloodsworn Mercenary. So if you use that on Leroy, that's potentially 16 damage. But yeah, pretty straightforward deck. If you like aggro decks, I think this will be a huge contender, and you get some very, very fast games. I don't foresee games lasting past turn 8 with this kind of a deck. Once you draw your Galakrond, you're probably just going to kill your opponent on the next turn. And the second deck I have for you guys for Warrior, and the last deck I have for you guys total, is going to be a Highlander Dragon Control Warrior. So we got a couple new control tools in Warrior, like the Ramming Speed and Molten Breath, which also suggests we should be running dragons. But also some dragons are just naturally control oriented anyways, despite if we even had any card that relied on them. So for example, like Ember Scale Drake puts out a nice body while giving us armor. Evasive Worm is kind of like a removal tool in a dragon body as well. Same thing with Crowd Roaster and Twin Tyrant. And then, of course, we have the reason we're going Highlander, Dragon Queen Alexstrasza. So she can be just another late game bomb as well, too. It's going to be pretty tough for your opponents to deal with. But one of my favorite cards in this deck, I'm sure one of your guys' favorite cards, is Deathwing Mad Aspect. So he is control and a body all smashed into one card. You get to clear everything on the board, and hopefully you'll have a minion left over with. Now, we don't actually have that many mechs in this deck because we are running so many dragons, but we do have a few of them, and then Dr. Boom Mad Genius is just such a good value card throughout the game that we just pretty much have to run him. But another legendary card is finally going to be able to see some play, is War Master Voon. So imagine having a copy of Dragon Queen Alexstrasza in your hand when you play War Master Voon. All of a sudden you get 2 copies of her. Or imagine having a Deathwing Mad Aspect in your hand and being able to copy him. Like, there's so many dragons that you'd love to have 2 copies of. And speaking of copying cards, one thing you can also do is copy a card with Dragon Breeder to get it back to your hand. So let's say if you have 10 mana, you can cast Deathwing Mad Aspect. You get to clear the whole board, and if he's still left over, you can cast Dragon Breeder on him for the rest of the 2 mana, so you can get another copy of Deathwing Mad Aspect in your hand for later. But yeah, there's just so many dragons and so many control tools available to Warrior now that we can definitely run Highlander, and we really don't lose out on anything. Just being able to cast the Dragon Queen Alexstrasza and Zephyrus, and then being able to maybe copy Dragon Queen Alexstrasza with some of our tools makes going Highlander very worth it. Now, I've got a couple bonus meme decks for you guys, and the first bonus meme deck is going to be a Raven OTK. So most of this deck is basically a control shell, just so we can basically last until that OTK. But how the OTK works is we have a Raven in our hand. We go ahead and discount it with the Scarlet Webweaver down to 0. And then we can copy the Raven with Hunting Party, and then we can copy it again with another Hunting Party. And so that way we would have 4 Ravens into our hand. And then we cast all 4 of them with a Tundra Rhino. So that is 12 damage on each Raven for a total of 50 damage in OTK. Now you can even get more than this damage if you want to. if the game goes super long, like let's say you're facing a control warrior, if you happen to get 2 Dread Ravens in your hand, because there are 2 in the deck, if you get them both discounted, then you cast Hunting Party and then Hunting Party again, you can potentially put down 6 Dread Ravens on the board with a Tundra Rhino in a single turn. So that's 18 damage on each Dread Raven for a total of 110 damage. I think that's just enough to get through a warrior's armor sometimes. And the second bonus meme deck that I have for you guys is going to be a Bad Luck Albatross deck. I know a lot of you guys have been looking forward to this one, so I figured I'd deliver. Now, don't take this deck too seriously. It is a meme deck, so I don't expect it to win too many times, but it is a very good deck to annoy your opponent with. So we have a ton of copying effects and priest, like Embalming Ritual, Shadowy Figure, Vivid Nightmare, Wretched Reclaimer, Grave Rune, which is the new card, etc. So we can all cast those on a Bad Luck Albatross to basically shuffle in 1 million of these Albatrosses into your opponent's deck. So that way it ensures that every single turn for the rest of the game, they're drawing these little 1/1 minions. Now, obviously, if we want to win, we need some kind of a win condition. So that's where we have Xeric Master Cloner into the deck. So as we're shuffling a ton of these Albatrosses into our opponent's deck, we can kind of work on our own board a little bit with the Xeric Master Cloner, maybe copy him a couple times, and then between him and all of the Albatrosses on our own side, we should be able to squeeze out enough damage while our opponent just basically does nothing but play Albatrosses. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you take away at least one of these decks so you can go ahead and have some fun on next Tuesday when Descent of Dragons gets released. Let me know which one of these decks you're looking forward to playing, or even let me know which one of your own you're planning on playing down below in the comments as well. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay funky.